Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Come on out, Lauren, Cooper, and Jonathan. So thank you guys so much for coming. We have a nice chunk of time to talk about the issue of social media and how it is impacting young people, their private lives, their development as young adults, and ultimately their mental stability and their mental health. So we're super lucky to have the director and the creator of a series that's on FX and who's it, Hulu or FX? Should I say Hulu? It's on Hulu right now.
FX, Hulu, and Disney Plus.
You have to speak in the microphone.
FX, Hulu, and Disney Plus.
Thank you. And we really appreciate FX's support in bringing these folks here and bringing this conversation to light. It's called Social Studies. And it's very much in line with the work that Lauren has done her whole career. I'm going to just speak for one moment that I have been a very dedicated follower of Lauren's career since I first moved to Los Angeles from Paris 20-some years ago, in which her first book was a story, was something that I covered for the Washington Post. And it was about the teenagers and the young people on the west side of LA. Was called Forward Fast at the time. She was a photographer, and she's developed into a very important documentarian since then. But it was the same concern with what our culture is doing and the environment that it's creating for our young people. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the series? Let me see, has anybody seen the series Social Studies? And raise your hand if you've seen it. Okay, quite a lot of people have seen it. Okay, well, okay, if you're all from FX up front, that doesn't help. Doesn't count. That's work. Okay, so only about half of the people have seen it, so use that.
Yeah, so as Sharon said, 30 years ago, I did a book called Fast Forward, Growing Up in the Shadow of Hollywood.
30 years? That was, damn.
About kids growing up in LA and really about the early loss of innocence in the media-saturated environment and how kids were being influenced by what I called the values of Hollywood, kind of the culture of materialism and celebrity and image. And then I was, I guess it was during COVID, noticing with my own boys, when I did Fast Forward, I was almost a teenager myself. It was like my first project. And
that's right, we were teenagers at the time, correct.
And then I was a mother of two teens. They were 14 and 20 when I began this, and just seeing what a huge influence social media had on them, but particularly on the younger one, and how in a way those 6 years was a kind of generational shift. And the younger one was completely addicted to screens. We would have constant battles over screen time. That's where he gets his news. And the older one was a reader. And so I started to think I need to go back to the kind of scene of the crime of Fast Forward and look at how young people were influenced by social media, with this idea that some of these values like fame and materialism and celebrity might be amplified in that world, but also really looking to see what else was going on and looking in the specifics. And so I created a kind of social experiment where for 1 year I followed a group of teenagers and was lucky enough to have Jonathan and Cooper among them. And during that year, followed them in their lives, but they also gave our team access to their phones, which was a huge deal, a huge trust, and also hugely important because I just felt like to understand how kids were impacted, we needed to really see what was going on. And we also heard from them. So the series kind of unfolds in multiple perspectives. We follow their lives, like cinema verite, kind of fly on the wall, very intimate situations, including lying to parents, jumping out of windows to see boys, all kinds of crazy parties. I think somebody called it real life euphoria, a lot of crazy stuff. But then we also get a chance to hear directly from the teenagers in interviews where they really break down so wisely what's going on. And then we also did these group sessions without phones where they talk to each other. And just to introduce Cooper and Jonathan a little bit more, not only were they subjects whose lives we were following, but they both are also listeners at Teen Line, which is a kind of hotline, particularly suicide hotline, but all kinds of teen problems hotlines for kids around the country. So they also know a lot about that. And they're also makers themselves. Cooper had a podcast, and Jonathan was making a film kind of alongside me, kind of a film within a film. So they kind of straddle, as a lot of the kids do in the series, being both subjects but also being experts. Because the thing, besides having their phones, the other thing that's unique about the series is it's all from the perspective of young people. There are no adult experts. There's no talking heads. There's no politicians or, researchers. It's all from their point of view.
Right. So one of the many things that the series highlights, which I have to say, like, it really did feel like you were watching a real life Euphoria. I don't know if you guys felt that way too. I personally have not liked watching Euphoria because it put me in such a scary place as a parent that I just felt like this is so extreme. This is never going to really be happening, and it's for dramatic effect. And then you see your documentary, and you're seeing private footage from the phones of these teenagers, and it is. I am really sad to tell you guys that it's really pretty close. It's really pretty close. There's like there's a party, so as two young people now. Let's just say, how old are you guys now? 21 and 20. Okay, and you were, 17, 18 when the series was shot? Something like that. Okay, and that's a lot of growth and change that happens in that time. But you've never lived in a world without a phone and social media. So when Lauren came to you and said, hey, how would you feel about sharing all this? Like, what did you think? Did you think, oh, this would be good so that people could see what our lives are like and the kind of pressures we're under? Or did you just think, oh, it'd be cool, like, maybe I'll get famous or something like that? Like, what did you think?
I think for both of us, just given kind of the work we were doing with Teen Line and really kind of seeing the issues that teens were facing, I'd say for me, it was more about the alignment with the values of the project of highlighting the issues that teens were facing. And it also kind of, in my mind, was really important that it was coming from people our age rather than experts, because I think it adds kind of a different layer to the conversation. I think my worst nightmare would be to become famous, and so that was like my biggest fear in that project. Like, I don't need to, go anywhere with this, and it was more of a step outside of my comfort zone because of the topic it was discussing.
I mean, I'll echo all of that. I'll also say that I think probably for Cooper and I, it's really weird seeing ourselves on camera and hearing our voice. Like, I hate it and cringe every time I get a clip or see the show, even though it's a very powerful show that I think you all should watch if you haven't seen it. But a lot of it was also built on trust with Lauren and her team and being vulnerable and opening up our phones. And I think that obviously came with time, but also knowing the impact that vulnerability could have on other teens and even parents and teachers as well.
Yeah, I mean, talk about that, because you were exposing a world that your parents really had. I think your parents are in the room, right? Raise your hands, parents. Yeah, hi guys. But this is not a world, and it might be interesting to hear from you guys later how you reacted to this. But this was not, you were exposing this not just to Lauren, but to other adults hadn't seen this, right? Is it right?
I mean, I feel like I'm very open with my parents, so anything was on the screen they knew, but it was really interesting to see, I spoke with Ivy about certain aspects of the film that her parents didn't know, and then they're finding out in real time through this piece. And so I think there definitely is something interesting about that, of having this separate kind of digital identity. And I think that's kind of a big thing for teenagers, is there's this distinction between who they are as a person and then who they present themselves as online. And I think you can see that more clearly in this film because you're getting the side-by-side between the two realities for people.
We had a lot of surprises. Like, even when we showed the kids the film before it came out, or before it was on the air, a lot of them were really surprised. Like Keyshawn in episode 2, we learned he has a baby, and the other teenagers didn't know. And
He's like 17 in the show. He's really young.
And Ivy's mother was very kind of had gone down a conspiracy theory, like rabbit hole, and people didn't know about that. There were a lot of revelations, and so I think it did kind of speak to like both, in a way, social holds kind of secrets and lies, which is very pertinent to Cooper's specialty on eating disorders in our podcast, but also there were like multiple identities that we would see. So like you would see the social of somebody like Sydney, who dresses like super provocatively and does all these thirst traps and has a huge kind of following of men online. And then she would be in her room, which is like pastels and super sweet and innocent and like just wearing a sweatshirt. And that's like the real her too. So you could see kind of how the different identities are functioning alongside each other. And I think a lot of like Ivy's dad told me he was really surprised. And if I can call out one amazing contributor to our show, Malia Jacobs was the film teacher at Pali High and helped introduce me to some of the kids. And she was saying, like, there's a scene, Sydney, who dresses very provocatively, there's a scene where she talks about a really traumatic slut-shaming incident that happened at Pali High and kind of a diss track that her ex writes and that then goes all over like wildfire, and how painful this was for her. And Malia said that she was my student and I didn't know. And so I think, you know, that it's, in a way,
it's like the adults are walking around. There's this entire thing, like reality that all the kids are aware of, and none of the adults would be unless somebody would tell them.
exactly.
I mean, it's
and
kind of crazy.
Sydney's mom even says in the show, like, I don't know if I want to know what's on her TikTok. And I think that's been kind of like the big thing I've been saying to adults is, do watch the show, because I have heard some people say, like, I'm afraid to watch. And I think for young people, it's not scary. Like Cooper says, it's really entertaining, and like and they like Euphoria too, and they think Euphoria also is kind of real in a lot of ways. So I think there is a really strong generational gap, culture gap, between adults and teenagers in this generation.
Well, that was ever thus. There's always huge gaps between teenagers and their parents. But I think what you're highlighting particularly is how social media amplifies it, deepens it, complicates it, and leaves it online potentially forever in ways that can do a lot of harm. So I just want to ask you guys to share a little bit, about your experiences at Teen Line, because there's many scenes or several scenes of kids talking to other kids on the phone about either suicidal thoughts or something where they're in crisis. What was that like? Because you guys are dealing with your own lives. I don't know what motivated you to do that, but it certainly seems like something that adults should be doing rather than kids. But there you guys were talking to people in crisis. Could you talk about it a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak for myself, and I'm sure Cooper also echoes a lot of this, but Teen Line was one of the most indelible experiences of my life, and although I'm no longer a part just because we've sort of aged out, it still is an experience that I look back on. Even starting at Teen Line, it was a difficult discussion with my parents because they were sort of nervous about me going to that world and dealing with a lot of these difficult topics. One, we do get incredibly trained over many hours, and we also have a lot of support, but I think having a teen-to-teen crisis hotline that provides a factor of relatability can sometimes be more helpful than, talking to another adult. I also think the anonymity aspect also provides a much safer space for people, especially if they're not getting that same support at school or at home.
Well, give us an example, like what kinds of situations were you confronted with in talking to kids?
Yeah, you mentioned suicide, so there was both active suicidal ideation, cases where we may have to contact authorities to make a live rescue, suicidal ideation. It could be friend drama, bullying, sextortion. I mean, the list goes on.
I feel like you covered a lot of it. But it definitely did, I feel like, make me grow up very fast to be a part of Teen Line. And I think I knew that going into it. And you get trained for, I think it's 80 hours.
But what made you want to do it?
I think just the ability to help other people connect with teens. I think there is something very comfortable and familiar about a teen being able to talk to another teen who understands kind of the digital landscape that I don't think, someone older would understand. But I think I was really motivated by the fact that, people are in crisis. There is a mental health issue with kids our age, and it's a really valuable resource. But it definitely, you have nights where it's incredibly draining to do it, but you become really close with the people around you, and you have a great support system there to kind of get you through those moments. But I'd say it was one of the most valuable things I've ever done.
One of the things that I think happen in the show with these kids, and maybe it's generational, is that because it was kind of like the parents and teachers were kind of removed from this world that they were in, they were helping each other. Like there's a vigilante character who is helping kids who are victim of either racist incidents and sexual assault. And even he says, like, there are limitations to cancel culture. It's not like the perfect solution, but it's almost like they're acting in a void of a lack of effective kind of adult authority.
Well, yeah, that whole story was kind of crazy to me. Just to give you the context, there was a young woman who said she had been raped by a popular boy in the school, and she tried to report it, and they did nothing. I mean, if you would write that in a screenplay, it'd be like, yeah, that's not really very believable. And that was why this other young man who was outraged by that decided that he wanted to, was it dox the guy online, basically, as his way of, justice will be served. And it turned out that this was a guy, other girls, teenagers, had said they also had been sexually assaulted by this guy.
And then putting that together with, like, there was a kind of Me Too posting that another girl did. There was also Teen Line. There's also a couple podcasts where teens were helping other teens with mental health, including Cooper's podcast. It was almost like the kids had this empathetic ecosystem. And that was one thing that surprised me, because I think we do think of this generation as being very narcissistic. But one of the hopeful things in the show was the empathy that kids had for each other, and kind of the way they were trying to help each other in this world where it did seem like people really needed help. Like the numbers at Teen Line have exploded. Kids can't even find therapists. There's so much need for mental health.
Okay, so we're now like 2024, almost 2025 before we turn around. There's quite a lot of research on social media and what are some of the outcomes that can be tied back to the rise of social media. It's worth pointing out that Australia has just banned social media for, I think, people under 16, right? So it's almost like an R-rated movie, right? And there is some discussion about whether there should be regulation or some kind of boundaries put on it. I'm wondering now how you guys, Cooper and Jonathan, feel about this. I want to ask you too, Lauren, but I want to ask these guys first. And also, you now have a few years of distance from your teenage years. Is it unimaginable to you? Is it something that you think you wish somebody had looked out for you and maybe not given you and all your friends access to social media? How would life go on? Could you exist? Would the sun come up?
A couple of things, because there are a lot of different components to that. I think first, social media, it's unfortunate, but it does serve kind of a utility in my life of, social plans are made through Snapchat and things are posted on Instagram for clubs that I'm in at school. So you need to have it for that reason. And so you kind of feel bound to it in that way. And at the same time, I do know I don't want to be on these platforms. I shouldn't be on these platforms, and I want a way to get off, but there is this weird pull that I think a lot of people resonate with of, why am I so engrossed by this? Why am I so engaged by this? And I think as each year passes for me, I'm kind of getting better and better at distancing myself and kind of cutting myself off of it and really trying to be disciplined about using it for the purposes I need it to serve and then getting off besides that. And in terms of the regulation stuff, something that we've been talking about is California high schools starting to take away phones during the school day. And I think it's worked really well. I have a sister who's in high school who, when this was brought up, she thought it was unimaginable for this to happen. But I'd say it's been really great for them, and they would say that about that as well.
So I'm not as familiar. All the California high schools?
I don't know if it's
banned.
They're LAUSD starting in January, I think, and then Governor Newsom has passed a new bill where asking schools to either limit or forbid starting next year. During school.
Yeah, and so she's at a school where they've already instituted that. And I think there's something to be said about kind of younger people needing some sort of older kind of authority figure taking that away. And I also think as well, especially...
Meaning that nobody's going to have this self-discipline, or
Yeah.
you couldn't just go off social media and then exist in your class like all your friends are on it, so how could you not be?
I think the other thing, too, that's really difficult, especially in a school environment, is if everyone around you is still on their phone, you're just sitting there. And it's like, well, nobody else is looking up, so what am I supposed to do? It kind of just spreads in that way of if one person's looking at it, then everyone else does. And if you take a second to look up, there's no one there for you to be engaging with.
I think the only thing I'll add is, especially for our generation, social media has become so ubiquitous that I don't think we'll see a world without it. I think for younger generations, there are important questions to ask, but I think that all starts with the facility that allows you to be on social media, which is the cell phone itself. I mean, kids nowadays are getting phones in 5th grade, and despite age restrictions, I'm sure a 5th grader could figure out how to bypass a 16-year-old age restriction on social media. So I think that brings up really important discussions about what next steps need to be taken, whether that's on behalf of social media platforms or the government, et cetera.
Well, but I'm asking if you could imagine your teenage years, maybe up until 16, if that was the cutoff date that Australia just came up with. In your mind's eye, do you feel like, I wish I'd had that protection?
Looking back now, yeah. I
Yeah.
think Sydney says it in the series, but that it would have been a kinder world without social media. And I think
A kinder world. Yeah.
world. I think that speaks volumes about what social media facilitates and the kind of atmosphere it facilitates. So nowadays, as Cooper said, I just find a way to use it that hopefully strikes a healthy balance, but it's definitely something that's still challenging.
It's funny to me because I wonder if it really, there ought to be teenagers on the commission or people like you guys who've been through teenagers, but who, because I don't really know if Gavin Newsom is in touch with what the workarounds and the realities of it really feels like kids who've been through the risks that are posed by social media, you guys understand better than anyone what was taken from you, I guess is how I might put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this series shows all of the harms and the dangers of social media, but in episode 5, I think you also see an important role that it plays in terms of connection for one of the subjects. They had a child that had committed suicide as a result of mental health struggles, but largely because of bullying and other experiences at school. But they were able to find connection on social media, and that was their safe space where they couldn't find that elsewhere. So I think there are two sides to this discussion, and whether that's about finding ways that schools and home environments can become that safe space instead, or figuring out a way that social media platforms can serve that purpose while also not having these negative consequences that we talk about.
Mm-hmm. But this morning I was on Pivot, and Scott Galloway was saying that the downsides are so much bigger than the upsides. And so it's true that for LGBTQ plus, and we saw a couple examples of that in the series, there was community found. But in the person that Jonathan's talking about, that kid committed suicide after going to a forum where people were encouraging suicide. So I think
An online forum?
an online
encouraging
forum
suicide?
encouraging suicide.
Why would that even exist? That sounds
That's a really good question.
demented.
That's a really good question. It's not, yeah, this is a thing. And I think one of the things that Jonathan says in the series that's so profound is it's our lifeline, but it's also a loaded gun. And so I think it's not binary, like, is there good, is there bad? It's like we would not tolerate a loaded gun around our kids, so
Well, we
that's in
actually
there.
do tolerate loaded guns around our kids. I don't know if you've noticed.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
In,
There's
in
a school
Australia,
shooting
where
scare,
perhaps
too,
we
and
all want to move, they have banned such things, at least
No,
automatic
that's
weapons.
true. And one of the things that Cooper says in episode 5 is, will we exist if we're not online? It's like the new existential question, like, do we exist? And so I think it's only when there's collective bans, like in Australia or like in a whole school, because then the social life, they find other ways to socialize.
So are you in favor of regulation, or do you have an opinion about it?
I'm totally in favor. I think the age gating from Australia is great. And I think it's funny, like the social media companies used to say, like, we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to verify. And I was just reading something that Scott Galloway said about, like, these companies know everything about their customers and they can't figure out their age. So, yeah, no, I think it's great.
Yeah. I don't know if is there a movement here? There must be
I mean, I think there's a lot of parent groups who are encouraging parents to not give a smartphone until 16, but it's still elective. And one interesting thing,
I see kids in strollers with phones all the time. You know, they're like taking a walk down the street on a beautiful day in Los Angeles, and they're on the they're watching on the phone. It's like, it's all I can do to not walk up to the mother of the nanny, like, can't you let your kid look at the trees for a minute? You know.
well, the phones, I mean, Sydney's mom says this in the show, that it's often coming from the parents that want to be in touch with their kids for safety reasons,
Right.
without really realizing, like, what you see in the show is, like, a parent might be right next to their daughter. We see this with Jordan and her mom, Karen, who's like a lovely, caring, strict mother. And her daughter will be talking to men from all over the country, literally on the couch next to her mom. So I think this idea that it's more dangerous to, you know, go to the bus stop without your phone, or go to the park without your phone, or play with your friends somewhere is actually false, and that's one thing that we need to kind of shift off of.
I do want to open it up for questions, because I'm sure lots of people have thoughts about social media and how it's impacting their lives or their kids' lives. And I guess, would it be okay to ask your parents if they have a comment? I mean, I think we have the moms and two moms and one dad. Do you want to talk about I would be curious to know if you felt you discovered anything about your kids and their community in watching the series. Would that be okay to ask you? Sure. Can we pass this back?
Oh, thanks. Hi, I'm Allison Gelfand. I'm Jonathan's mom. I didn't discover too much about my own child. What I discovered was about all these other children that I honestly didn't know that so much of it was going on. Some of it I did. And he's very open with me, and he really is not a huge poster. I see him on his phone all the time, I was worried about Teen Line when we originally talked about that as well, because I thought that was a lot to carry home. And until I heard another mother at our meeting saying that it was the best thing her kid ever did, and I do believe now that this was after seeing him, because I didn't know what his phone calls were like. We weren't allowed to hear anything. He was home for part of it because it was COVID. And he locked himself in his room and would make his phone calls. And so I was very impressed with his empathy, which he's always had. And just to see how they worked with these other children, teens, not children, was really impressive to me as well. But yeah, he is. I was happy with how he came out in the show. Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Karen. I'm Cooper's mom. I'm not the Karen who was sitting next to the daughter. Just to clarify. when Cooper first wanted to get involved in this, I was definitely a little bit nervous. But meeting Lauren and, going through the work that she's done before, I felt really comfortable that this wasn't a reality show. This wasn't Lauren trying to create entertainment and characters. This was Lauren really trying to capture these teens in their natural environment and what was really going on. Cooper has always been a big advocate for mental health and also an advocate for really showing herself as she is. So it aligned with those principles that she lives by, that she was willing to put herself out there. Some of it was, hard to watch. The whole college admissions process was painful to watch again. But I'm proud that she was willing to share herself. And what I learned from it, there was nothing super surprising about Cooper, but really to see the reality of what these kids are dealing with. Cooper's my oldest. I have 2 teenagers as well. That's my husband. I think as for those of you who are parents, a lot of times your kids come home and they're complaining, and you're like, oh, they're exaggerating, right? You kind of maybe don't believe it, or they're making it into more than it is. And I think seeing it unfold in your show really makes you realize that these guys are up against a lot, navigating a lot. And I will say that this new movement towards taking the phones away in high school has been spectacular. And I've asked every one of my younger daughter's friends when they come in, I'm like, what do you think about this? And 2 to 1, they all really approve of having their phones taken away. They love it. They love it. They're talking to each other at lunch. They're interacting at break. They're focusing in class. It's really made a massive difference. So I think that is something that should be happening everywhere.
I just want to say thank you to these parents, because it's really huge. Like, to make a series like this, we first of all can't do it without them, but second of all, without like the huge sacrifice of the parents, the trust, but also like coming in with tons of gear and repeated times and over a long period of time. And I think that, one of the surprising things about the participants in the show is I did think in the beginning, are we going to have to correct for people self-selecting to be in the show because they wanted fame or they wanted to be seen in some way in this social media age that really values fame for young people? And one of the surprising things is they really brought themselves so authentically. Like, I remember when we had the first group session, nobody was wearing makeup, and it didn't seem like anybody had curated their clothes or anything, even though they might do that for school. They certainly do that for a party. And so they really like brought themselves very authentically to this project. And I just so appreciate that. And I don't know if it was because you guys thought the subject was important, but it was, I didn't have to correct for like a performative element in those settings. Not that there weren't some people, like maybe Keyshawn, who was a musician, who would like then go into his role there. But when they came together, they were so honest with each other.
There was nobody you had to like prune out. It was.
Well, I mean, they were all selected. I did interview over 200 people.
Yeah.
So there was definitely, but I'm also interested in the performance. Like, that's also my subject in this setting. So I wouldn't have necessarily, taken that out. And, I think with Sydney, you could see she had those two sides. Like, she would do these super sexy videos.
It was almost hard to believe it was the same person when you see her in sweatpants in her room.
Yeah.
And then because you're seeing like the camera's like in, like on screen, you're just seeing the phone, you're actually.
And actually I don't think it was easy for any of them, particularly these two. Like, one of the things about the group is not only was it diverse socioeconomically, but also in terms of their relationship to social media. Like, Jonathan never posted about himself. So he was kind of like a person who had a very different relationship with social media. So, I think that was kind of surprising that they were not performative in that way, but also I think helpful because we needed that authenticity.
We have a question? Yes. Yeah.
I can speak loudly.
Sure.
Because of the importance and the complexity of the issues that are raised, could you talk a little bit about the curriculum that you developed and how it's being implemented?
Yeah, and Jonathan helped with the curriculum too. So the Annenberg Foundation helped us fund a curriculum, which is based on the show, but deals with all of the different issues in social media for teachers, and it's available for free at learner.org/social studies. And so it's over 250 pages, very robust, also has resources for teenagers, and it's really about kind of providing a way to discuss all of these issues and develop media literacy in class. And one of the things that happens throughout the series is this like group kind of roundtable discussion. And I started that just for research, not knowing if it would be in the actual series, but it ends up being a kind of through line throughout the series, and partially because I found that young people really wanted a safe space to talk about these issues. It's actually something we started in Malia's class, just a kind of safe space to talk about all the issues, and that was much more appealing to them than actually being filmed in their lives. Like that took a little bit more, talking through. But they really did want this space. And actually one of the things that Cooper says at the end, which I find so moving, is wouldn't it be great if we could have a space like this outside of this? And I thought that was so shocking to somebody from my generation that would actually seem like a hard thing to be able to just communicate face to face with peers without phones. But actually, it was an unusual experience.
Yeah, question down here?
Question. You see how addictive it is, and I look at cigarettes in the 50s, and then the children of those parents who smoked, they're like, I will never smoke because my parents smoked so much. Do you think that your kids will look back and be like, oh my God, my parents were online, they grew up online, I don't want to be online? Or is it going to be so addictive that it will continue going downwards where the parents are online, the kids are online, like everybody's online? Or is there hope that what you said, Cooper, like you will be able to enjoy life outside of the networks?
Well, I think that it's a mistake to put it on.
Were you able to hear the
Could you hear?
question? Yeah.
I think it's a mistake to put that onus on young people. I feel like that's a mistake that I got into as a parent, like arguing with my son about screen time, because I think it is like an opiate addiction, and we would not blame the addict. And one of the things that almost all the kids said is if they had a choice, they would rather live in their parents' generation before the smartphone. And Sydney called them the guinea pig generation. And I do feel like maybe in future generations, they'll look back on this and say, how did we let kids have this? Because, we don't let kids have access to alcohol or cigarettes. And age gating is normal. And now we have this whole, is it a problem for freedom of speech to age gate something that we know is dangerous for young people? So hopefully.
I think this was actually something we talked about in one of our group discussions, and I don't think it ended up making the final cut of the film, but kind of talking about becoming a parent in the future and being scared of, I don't want to be on my phone. That's really strange to me because I didn't grow up that way. My parents didn't have smartphones when they were raising me. I don't have that as part of my kind of childhood memories. And kind of looking around now, kind of what you're seeing as well with kids on their phones or kids on an iPad at a dinner table out in public, I'm scared. I'm like, I don't want that to be my family. I don't want that to be the way I, raise kids one day. And I think a lot of people agreed with that. And so I don't know if it's hard because I don't think it can be put on the individual, but in my mind it's there's gonna need to be a point where it's just you grow up and you don't use it. But it's also everyone in my life is using a phone, not just the teenagers. I'm sure I see everyone on social media and on their phone. And so I guess I wonder, is that even a realistic expectation in my mind that one day, a light is just going to switch? Okay, it's time to be done with this. but I do think about it a lot. Anything?
The only thing I would add is even among our generation, I think the tide is already changing. Like I have a buddy who has a 12-year-old brother who is instructing his parents like not to let him on his phone so much. And so I think the experiences that we have are already hopefully starting to make an impact with the younger generations.
Yeah, but if the 12-year-old little brother has a phone, I mean, he'll probably do what he feels he wants to do. And of course, by the time he's 14, he'll know better than everybody what is good for him, right? And is not open to necessarily to advice from grown-ups.
Sure.
So that's the issue. I think that's why Lauren's talking about the need for regulation or the need for, because the truth is, as parents, when someday you guys are, may well be parents, you're not able to police every minute of your kid, and by the time they're teenagers, it's impossible, and so you've already done the work. By the time they're 12, like you're pretty much cooked, like as a kid, right? And then you just hope and pray that they use good sense, and that the mistakes that they're going to make are just not going to be life-ending or life-altering in a major way. But you don't have control. But the problem to me with social media is that it becomes viral in an instant. And you then are exposed to all your vulnerabilities. Any mistake, any bump, stupid thing you did is immediately known to everybody. That's the thing. Do you remember the story of that girl who she had lost her job? She was like on a plane. I can't remember exactly the social media stories. This early in the internet. You're nodding. She wrote something on social media, and then she got on a plane to South Africa for 10 hours, and she'd been fired by the time she landed, and she didn't even know that people had seen it. So, that times every single teenager in the country. That's the thing, I think, that just makes it a completely other level. Other than that, it's all the same for like when Lauren and I were teenagers, or for when kids 10 years older than you were teenagers. All those basic things, like you're gonna do stupid things, like it's a given. But not every single person in your community needs to know about it and enshrine it in dots and dashes forever and ever. Anyway, yes, question over there.
Right. So as a person who produces independent documentary filmmakers, congratulations on getting this out as a series and on all the things in the partnership with Edinburgh. Could you talk about your process of getting this project off the ground?
Yeah. Well, I started it independently. So we raised some money independently and kind of began the process in the beginning. And then once we got to, once we kind of had it formulated, then we brought it to distributors with the help of my agent who's here. And we kind of showed it to everybody. I will say that when we were this was kind of made in the golden age of documentary, which is no longer. So I don't know that it would have gotten made today, but I feel really grateful that we were able to make it when we did. And I had a huge, incredible creative support at FX in the process of making it. So yeah, that was kind of the process. I just want to address the thing about the cigarettes though, because I think one of the places I thought you were going was with the cigarette research, and I do hope that this show and some of the other things that are out there right now acts as adding to the research. Like when cigarettes were shown to cause cancer, regulation ensued, and we didn't know what social media was going to do to young people when it started. We all gave it to our kids. We all went on thinking it was a way for us to connect with friends and people we hadn't seen, and not really understanding that it was our information that was for sale and their information that's for sale. So I hope that there is regulation that ensues. It does seem like maybe the next 4 years are not the time for regulation of the tech companies.
I'll also remind you, it was decades of misinformation and, grassroots, like fake research, when we learned later that the tobacco companies knew exactly how addictive their products were and how toxic they were to the human body. And so it probably took 40 years.
And that came out in the TikTok research. Like they showed that TikTok knew all of the harms. And actually,
was it TikTok? Yeah,
TikTok,
not
when
Facebook.
the 12 states are suing TikTok, and the information came out that they know that it's addictive in 35 minutes, and they know that they prefer or they made the algorithm to privilege beautiful people, which they know causes body image issues, and that the safeguards that they put for time, they knew they were ineffective, but they said they would still be good for PR. So, I mean, one of the things that really moved me when I saw there's this movie out this year about Jim Henson. And one of the things that I learned about the beginning of Sesame Street is that Joan Gans Cooney had this idea to bring together people who know what kids love with people who know what kids need to learn, and brought them together as an educator. And I was thinking, like, it's so different from tech, where not only are they not thinking about what's good for kids, but they're actually indifferent to the harms that are there for kids. And so, but it was still like a nice reminder that you could do something good with intention. And I think that's what we have to remember about the algorithm when we're thinking about, like, should we have it? Should we not have it? Can we live with it? Can we live without it? Like, no, it's actually engineered to be exactly the way it is for maximum engagement. And it's not just a threat to young people, it's also a threat to Hollywood. Like, Hollywood is the only, the tech industry is the only unregulated industry. Like, movies and television are regulated. Yeah. And so they can just go for maximum engagement at any cost.
Yeah, totally. I think we have time for one last question. Is there, you got one? Oh, we've got the Pally High School teacher. Yes.
I've been a teacher for almost 30 years, so I've seen students from the before times and during the early days and after. And we keep talking about restriction. And one thing I know as a teacher is when you take something away, then as soon as they get it back, they want it that much more. And so I feel like the biggest piece here is curriculum, right? Just like you've already started, but within the schools. So we're trying to do digital literacy. We're trying to teach the kids, but really we're just teaching them right now how to, like, tell fake news from real news. That's kind of all, right, we teach. And it's put upon an exhausted, overworked English teacher. And I feel like, well, we've already changed with the times. You know, we brought in robotics and other kinds of tech ed stuff into our curriculum. So why don't we change with the times and start training teachers and get a class and make it, I mean, California would be a place to start. Make it a class that the students can talk to each other, put our phones away, discuss, and learn, so that when they get their phones back, they can make the decision for themselves. I think that's where we need to head as well. Just me saying.
Bravo. Yeah. Great thought. I think we're out of time. We have the next breakout room. It's going to want the space. But thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you for
Cooper.
having
Thank
us.
you, Jonathan.